Niger is one of Africa's largest countries, but much of its story is shaped by what it lacks: access to the sea, reliable rainfall, and easy routes for development. Officially the Republic of the Niger, it sits in West Africa as a vast landlocked state stretching from the dry Sahel into the deep Sahara. On a map, Niger looks enormous, covering almost 1.27 million square kilometers, making it the sixth largest country in Africa and the second largest landlocked nation on the continent after Chad. But size does not translate into easy prosperity. More than 80% of Niger's territory lies in the Sahara Desert, and most of its roughly 29 million people live far from that desert interior, clustered in the south and west where water, farming, and trade are more possible. Niger's geography helps explain nearly everything about the country. It borders 7 countries: Libya to the northeast, Chad to the east, Nigeria to the south, Benin and Burkina Faso to the southwest, Mali to the west, and Algeria to the northwest. This position makes Niger a crossroads between North Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa. But being landlocked also means that trade depends heavily on neighbors, roads, borders, and regional stability. Goods must travel long distances to reach ports, raising costs and slowing development. The country is named after the Niger River, and its capital, Niamey, sits in the southwest along that river. In a country dominated by desert and drylands, the river is more than a geographic feature. It is a lifeline for settlement, farming, transport, and political power. The contrast between Niger's north and south is striking. The northern and central regions are dominated by the Sahara, with vast expanses of sand, rock, mountains, and sparse settlements. In these areas, survival has historically depended on mobility, trade routes, and adaptation to extreme conditions. Farther south, the land becomes part of the Sahel, the semi-arid belt just below the Sahara. This is where rainfall is more common, though still unpredictable, and where most of Niger's people live. The south supports farming, livestock, towns, and cross-border trade, especially with Nigeria. This uneven geography creates an uneven country, huge territories with few people in the north, and densely settled agricultural zones in the south where pressure on land and water continues to grow. Long before Niger became a modern republic, the region was connected to major African states, trade systems, and Islamic networks. As Islam spread across the Sahara and Sahel, Niger's territory became linked to religious scholarship, commerce, and political authority. Parts of the area were influenced by powerful states such as the Kanem-Bornu Empire and the Mali Empire. Later, more significant portions of present-day Niger were tied to states including the Sultanate of Agadez and the Songhai Empire. These connections mattered because Niger was not an isolated desert space. It was part of a wider world of caravan routes, salt and gold trade, Islamic learning, and shifting regional powers. Cities and trading centers grew where geography allowed people, goods, and ideas to meet. The arrival of European colonial rule transformed Niger's political path. During the scramble for Africa, France expanded across West Africa and incorporated Niger into French West Africa. Niger became a distinct colony in 1922, but colonial boundaries often cut across older communities, trade patterns, and political systems. French rule introduced new administrative structures, taxes, forced labor demands, and economic priorities oriented toward empire. Like many colonies, Niger was governed from outside, with decisions made according to French strategic and economic interests rather than local development. The colonial period also helped shape Niger's later borders, institutions, and dependence on exportable raw materials. When independence came in 1960, Niger inherited the formal structure of a state, but also many of the deep constraints created or intensified under colonial rule. Since independence, Niger's politics have been marked by repeated instability. The country has experienced 5 coups d'état and 4 periods of military rule. That pattern reflects the difficulty of building durable civilian institutions in a country facing poverty, regional insecurity, environmental stress, and competition over state power. Niger's seventh and most recent constitution was enacted in 2010, creating a multi-party, unitary semi-presidential system. On paper, this meant elected institutions, multiple political parties, and a division of executive authority. But constitutional systems depend on more than written rules. They require trust, legitimacy, security, and civilian control over the armed forces. In 2023, Niger experienced its most recent coup, after which the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, a military junta led by General Omar Tiani, took power. Niger's population is diverse, but the Hausa are the largest ethnic group, making up around 56% of the population. Communities in Niger are shaped by language, region, livelihood, and historical ties that often extend across modern borders. The Hausa world, for example, connects Niger closely with northern Nigeria, where Hausa language and culture are also deeply rooted. According to the source article, Hausa is the official language, while 10 other indigenous languages have national language status. Language in Niger is not just a tool for communication, it is part of how people trade, govern locally, preserve identity, and connect to wider cultural regions. The country's population is predominantly Muslim, reflecting centuries of Islamic influence across the Sahel and Sahara. Religion plays an important role in social life, education, law, and community organization. The economy of Niger is heavily shaped by the environment. Much of the population depends on subsistence agriculture, meaning families grow food primarily for their own survival rather than for large commercial markets. In the less arid south, some export agriculture is possible, but rainfall is uncertain and drought can devastate harvests. Livestock herding is also important, especially in dryland zones where mobility helps people cope with seasonal changes. This makes Niger highly vulnerable to climate variability. A bad rainy season can affect food supplies, incomes, and migration patterns. When agriculture is the foundation of daily survival, environmental shocks are not abstract climate events. They become immediate household crises, determining whether families have enough grain, whether animals survive, and whether children can remain in school. Niger is also known for uranium, one of its most important raw material exports. Uranium ore connects Niger to global energy markets because it is used in nuclear power production. Yet the presence of valuable minerals does not automatically create broad prosperity. Extractive economies often face a familiar challenge. Wealth is concentrated in specific locations and industries, while most citizens remain dependent on farming or informal work. Mining can generate government revenue and foreign interest, but it also requires infrastructure, regulation, transparency, and stability to benefit the wider population. Niger's landlocked position raises costs, and political instability can complicate investment. The result is a country with strategic resources, but also a development model that struggles to turn those resources into widespread improvements in education, health, roads, and jobs. Poverty is one of Niger's most serious challenges. According to the United Nations Multidimensional Poverty Index report of 2023, Niger is among the poorest countries in the world. Multidimensional poverty means more than low income. It includes limited access to education, healthcare, clean water, electricity, adequate housing, and other essentials. Niger's low literacy rate is part of this cycle. When fewer people have access to quality education, it becomes harder to expand skilled employment, strengthen institutions, improve health outcomes, or diversify the economy. Poverty also makes families more vulnerable to drought, food price increases, illness, and insecurity. In a country where many households rely on farming and livestock, one shock can undo years of progress, keeping communities trapped in fragile conditions. Niger's environmental pressures are intensified by drought and desertification. Desertification does not simply mean the desert moves like a wall across the map. It often means that soils degrade, vegetation declines, water becomes scarcer, and land becomes less productive. In Niger, non-desert areas can still suffer from periodic drought, especially in the Sahelian south where most people live. As the population grows, more land is needed for farming, grazing, firewood, and settlement. This can increase pressure on fragile ecosystems. The challenge is especially difficult because the same land must support food production today while remaining usable for future generations. Managing water, restoring soils, protecting vegetation, and adapting farming practices are not optional environmental projects. They are central to Niger's long-term survival and stability. One of the biggest forces shaping Niger's future is population growth. The country has a very high fertility rate, linked in the source article to limited use of birth control, and the population has grown rapidly. A young and growing population can be a source of energy, labor, and cultural vitality, but only if schools, jobs, health systems, and infrastructure grow fast enough to keep up. If they do not, the result can be deeper poverty, unemployment, pressure on farmland, and increased migration. Niger also faces terrorism and regional insecurity, especially in a wider Sahel region affected by armed groups and weak state control in border areas. Niger's story, then, is not just about hardship. It is about a country with deep history, strategic geography, and human potential, struggling against some of the toughest development conditions on Earth. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.